Hey guys, welcome to this section on next-gen projects. I wanted to make this a separate section on its own because, first of all, it doesn't cater specifically to users or managers or admins, but rather anyone in Jira can create a next-gen project and manage it themselves. It's something that Atlassian added towards, I want to say, mid-2018, and is basically a project that is faster to set up and a lot easier to configure. You can toggle features on and off really easily, and you also don't need any admin privileges to create it. However, you do need one specific global permission enabled, which is usually the case by default. So unless that setting has been changed by your admin, any team member can create a next-gen project, even as like a personal project, and make it private. And now that I'm back as the administrator, let me show you that global permission that allows anyone to create a next-gen project. So if I come up here to the settings cogwheel, let's go to System, and then we will go to Global Permission. And once I scroll all the way down, you can see here there's a global permission called Create Next-Gen Projects. And I mean, here it says public, anyone on the internet, including logged in and anonymous users, can create next-gen projects. But I'm not sure if this is a mistake. I don't believe it's entirely true. Before, Jira used to have anyone here or any logged in user would have this permission. It says here public, but anonymous users are not allowed to create projects. There are features in Jira that allow anonymous users to access projects and view projects, but you can't just access anyone's Jira instance and start creating projects, and I've verified this. So I do find this a little strange that by default Jira is displaying this. Maybe in the days to come they're going to modify this and make it more appropriate. Okay, so coming back to the projects page, when I go to create a project, as we've seen before, I have two options. And here it kind of describes a little about the next-gen project. You can see it says that it's best for nimble, independent teams with a limited feature set, although it is easier to set up, and anyone can set it up. And if I scroll down here, you can see it's got a feature called roadmaps, which we will look at. It does not allow you to customize the issue card layout. It's got a lot fewer reports than what a classic project would have. Your estimations can only be in story points and not hours, and it doesn't have these features like the workflow editor, parallel sprints, detailed permissions, and cross-project setups. And by this I think they mean multiple boards in a project or having a board represent multiple next-gen projects, as well as quick filters. However, I do want to caveat this by saying these features are not available yet. Atlassian is putting in a lot of work towards improving this, and over the past several months, I have seen next-gen project features evolve, and it's going to continuously improve, and more features are going to come about. I think the advantage is that these next-gen projects are isolated from the rest of Jira, so anything you create or configure within it is only within that project scope and doesn't affect the rest of Jira. So I wanted to take a few videos just to show you the capabilities of this next-gen project. So let's conclude here for the introduction, and let's watch me click this button in the next video where we will start our descent into next-gen projects. Okay, so let's create our next-gen project. So as expected, we would need to put in a name for the project. I'll just call this my next-gen project, and we have to specify the access level. So the options available here are private, limited, or open. Open would just imply that anyone in the cloud instance would have access to the project and is able to create and edit issues. Limited would imply that they are only able to view issues, so they cannot create or edit. And then private would imply that it's completely private, nobody can access the issues. So for now, I'll just keep it as open, and we'll revisit the access restrictions later on as well. I'm okay with the key that it suggests. Let's just take a look at the templates that are available. So you can see that right now there's only software templates, and it's the Kanban and Scrum templates that are available. So let's just go with Kanban. and we'll create it. So right off the bat, we are taken to the board, and if I look at the left side here, we've got this thing called roadmaps, which we will look at, and it looks pretty simple, but we will see how we can enable other features in this project. But just looking at the board for now, I can start creating my issues really easily. If I just come in here, click create issue, and type out issue 1, hit enter, create another one if I want to. It's really easy to do that. I can even create an issue in any column. So for example, let's say there's a ticket that I need to create that's already in progress. I can come in here and just do that. Another thing I want to show you is you can bulk create tickets. So for example, if you have a list of tickets in a spreadsheet, or in this case, I'll just use a notepad file, and let me just type out issue 4, issue 5, issue 6. I can copy all of these, and when I paste it in here, you can see that Jira asks me if I want a hand because it noticed that I have multiple issues and multiple lines. So it's just like, hey buddy, do you want a hand with that? We can create 3 issues. So I can just go ahead and click on that, and bam, we've got 3 issues. So it's a quick way of creating and populating your next-gen board with a bunch of issues. Now also keep in mind that if you have a lot of issues, you don't have to scroll all the way down, at the bottom of the column to create your next one. You can kind of just hover in between, and you see that line that appears, click on it over there, and then you can create your next issue like that. So very easy to create issues. Let's look at the columns. So if I want to add another column, right now we've got our default to do in progress done, but then just click on the plus icon here, and I can add a column. So let's just call this review, and then I can take that column and drag it in before done, and then that's it. So the columns that you see here basically represent your workflow. So there isn't any separate workflow configuration for next-gen projects. It is pretty much the board, and every column represents a status in the workflow, and you can transition from any column to any other column. So very basic and straightforward. And another thing to note is that the last column on the board is always your resolution column, which means that if you have sprints enabled, well, before that, if you move a ticket into there, this tick mark over here indicates that the resolution will get set to being done. And then also, if you have sprints enabled, when you complete a sprint, issues in this column will go away because, well, they're essentially complete. If you don't have sprints, so in this case this is just a regular Kanban format, then the issues will be automatically removed and archived after, I believe, 14 days of being in that column, which is really helpful when it comes to keeping the board manageable. However, you can still find those issues that get archived. The moment the board archives some issues, at the bottom you will see some text that says, hey, are you looking for an older issue? Which you can click on, and that will just take you to the issue navigator page with the status selected as done, as in it is filtering by the done status. And since we're talking about the columns and this currently being in a Kanban format, if you want to set a work in progress limit for any of the columns, you can do that by hovering at the top here, clicking on the ellipsis, and then you can see the option to set a column limit. So you could just go in and you can put in whatever limit that you would like over there. Okay, and of course you can drag and move issues to pretty much anywhere. And if I move it to the done column, you'll see that it gets the green tick, which means that it is done and the resolution is also set. And as expected, you can click on the issue to view the details. Now it's giving it to me in this modal pop-up, but I always prefer to open it in a sidebar. So you can do that here as well. And here you can see the resolution being set and the other familiar fields that you can update. Now this may be showing just a limited number of fields, but we will also see in a couple of videos that we can modify this and customize this and add more fields, custom fields, so on and so forth. One interesting feature about next-gen boards that I want to demo may not be super useful, but I think it's kind of cool and nifty. So let me just select this issue over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an attachment. And you can see I already have a couple of attachments uploaded from before. Let me just select this one and insert it. Now, if I refresh this board, Pay attention to this issue number 2 for which we uploaded the attachment. Bam! That image now appears on the card of the issue. So the way that works is if you upload attachments and if the first attachment is an image, then the board will display that image on the card itself. Now you may choose to have this enabled, or it might get a little annoying because it just increases the size of each card. So if you don't want that, you can always come in, hover over the image, and you can select hide on card. Now it doesn't update automatically, so I may have to do a quick refresh. And there you go. So it's hidden that way. But you know what? Just so we can see it, and I kind of think it's cool, so I'm just going to show it on the card. But let's move on. One more thing that you can do, and in fact, I'm not sure if I covered this in a classic project Agile board, but you have the ability to add a flag. So when I click on that, it basically just highlights that card and it puts in this little flag icon at the bottom right. Now, so what you could do is you and your team that's working on this project can come to some kind of consensus on the definition of what a flagged issue is, and then you can use that feature just to identify them easily on the board. Coming up to the top here, you can filter for issues. So if I just type in the text, you can see that it finds the issue. Very similar to the Agile boards that we have seen. You can filter by assignee, and on the right side, you can group by certain variables, and these are basically representing your swim lanes. So if I come in, for example, and select subtask, right now none of these issues have subtasks. So let me just select issue number 2, and I'm going to add a subtask. So let's just call this subtask 1, hit create, and then you see that issue 2 now has its own swim lane with subtask displayed here, while all the other ones are in their own swim lane because they don't have subtasks. Similarly, you can also set up the swim lanes to be based on assignee. Now all the tickets here are unassigned, so it's just in one swim lane. Okay, so let me close the details view here, and coming up to the top, you can star this board, and if you click on the ellipsis here, there are things called rules, which we will look at in just a few seconds. But before that, I also want to point out you can hide cover images as a global, not global, but I guess a board setting right here. So if a whole bunch of images are showing up because you have attachments for all the cards, you can just hide all of them easily and it'll just get rid of them, or you can show them through that setting there. Okay, so let's talk about rules. When I click on Manage Rules, you can see that you can add rules. And right now, at least as of this recording, there are only 2 rules that are available. One is you can specify an issue to get assigned to someone automatically when you move it to a certain column, or similarly, you can have an issue field updated. So let's try them one by one. I'll select this, and now I get to pick what column I want it to affect. So I'll use the in progress column, and let's say that anything moved into in progress should get assigned to the developer. So when I click add, now if I move, let me leave that one blank. Let me move issue 7 into the in progress column, and right away you see it popped up here because we have our swim lanes based on the assignee. So it got assigned to the developer, and you can see that swim lane now created. So let's look at the other rule. So if I click on add rule, now let's select update issue field, select. So once again, I have to pick the column that I want it to trigger. And now these are the fields that are currently available that we can update. Going forward, I'm sure Atlassian is going to add more options. So let's just pick labels as an example for now. And I will pick the maintenance label that we've been using. Click add, close. So now if I move issue 4 into the in progress column, we should expect it to get assigned to KS Developer, which it did, and you can see the maintenance label now appearing on the card. And at the top, if you notice, we now have another filter where we can filter by the label. So pretty cool, right? It's a very flexible and nimble board, and you saw how easy it was for me to create issues, add and play around with the columns, add certain rules to the board, and so on. So now that we have taken a look at this board, let's look at some of the other features of a next-gen project, in particular the roadmap feature. Alright, so let's head over to our roadmap. Now, this is a new feature only available in next-gen projects, at least as of this recording. In fact, you should probably just caveat everything I say in this section with as of this recording, because who knows how things are going to evolve from here with all this stuff. So roadmaps are where you can create and manage your epics in the project. There is something called advanced roadmaps, but that is only available in the Jira Cloud Premium service offering. Okay, so it's already calling me out to create my first epic, and with my brilliant creativity, I'm going to call it Epic 1. And might as well create a couple more, just so we have some things to work with. Now also keep in mind, just like in the board, if you have a lot of epics, you don't have to keep scrolling all the way down to find the create epic option. You can kind of hover in between two epics to create one. And let me just move that down. Of course, you can see that you can drag and drop and reposition them. And as you create an epic, it creates a corresponding bar. So overall, you can see that this is starting to look like a Gantt chart. If you're familiar with Gantt charts, this looks very much like that. And right on the board, you can start expanding and contracting the length. So what this is supposed to represent, I guess, is just your plan. And these epics are supposed to represent larger bodies of work. So all the work that you're tracking in this next-gen project should be broken into epics, and then under the epics you will have the individual tasks or stories, whatever it is you are working with. So the bars that are displayed here for each epic, you can plan out how long you think each of them should take and then kind of create your overall project plan. So you can drag them along the timeline. You can even click on the bar or just click on the epic itself, and then you'll have the similar details. And at the bottom, you can come in and you can specify the start and end dates manually here. So let's say this maybe had started a while ago, so it started, mid last month, and then the due date could be the end of this month. And then when I click out of that, and then let me just close this. So now you can see that this bar got updated accordingly. And then of course you can even change the colors. So if you don't want all of them to be purple, you can come in here and change the color. So for example, this one I can make it blue, and then here I can make this maybe orange. And then since I updated those two, I might as well go for the last one. Let's make that yellow, if I'm seeing the colors correctly. Okay, so that's pretty much the gist of it. Now another thing that Atlassian introduced, and this is pretty recent actually, just so I can play with all of this in a single view, and maybe I can shrink this. There we go, that's much better. All right, let me bring these in. Another thing that you can do is you can set up dependencies. So when I hover over one of these bars, you can see these circles that appear on the end, and on either end, I guess. So what I can do is I can click on the circle and then drag it to another issue. And then when I release my click, it sets up a dependency. If you've used other Gantt chart software, you're probably familiar with this. And then what that does is it basically sets up a dependency between these two issues, where this issue would be blocking this issue. And when I click on the actual dependency arrow, you can see that Epic 1 blocks Epic 2. And now if I look at the details of Epic 1, I can see that under the linked issues, the exact same thing, that is blocking this. And then if I click on Epic 2, it should say it is blocked by Epic 1. Now, let's say that Epic 3 was actually scheduled for, around this time. If I drag from the beginning of this epic and I connect it to this, what's going to happen is it's going to set the dependency this way. Because I was dragging from the beginning, that means that this issue is dependent on this one. If I drag it from the end, that means it is actually blocking another one. So you can see here that this line is now red because it doesn't make sense that if this issue is dependent on this one, then you can't really work on it until this one gets completed. So that's why it's kind of highlighting that as red. So if I were to drag this forward, You can see then it removes that red highlight and it becomes a normal connection, just to indicate that, okay, now the plan looks realistic. So similarly, if I drag it from the end of this one, so that would mean that this particular epic should be blocking this one. So when I do that, because it starts slightly before that, it highlights in red, but if I move this forward, now it's gray. And then you can use that, end of this month looks like a realistic, at least based on the plan right now, looks to be a realistic point by when, all this work is going to be completed. So that's a look at this dependency functionality that's been introduced. You can even unlink issues. So if you click on a dependency, you can click on this little icon here to unlink it, and then that would remove the dependency. Okay, so yeah, I mean, given that these are epics, you can create issues under the epics. So by clicking on this plus sign here, we can start to create more issues. I don't remember what number we're on right now, so I'll just call this issue 10. Let's create another one, issue 11. And then we would expect that these issues would also now appear on the board. So if I go back to the board, and you know what, I'm just going to hide the cover images. And there you can see 11 and 10 and 11, and they're assigned to the epic. So I can come in to the issue card as well, and I can add a parent. So let's just say that this issue is going to be under epic 2, and click done. So epic 2 appears. You can see it's highlighted by the same color. And now if I go to roadmap, epic 2 now has an issue underneath it. And you can also see that each of the epics have a progress bar. So if I were to come in, and let me just select maybe this issue. I'm also going to add this to the first epic. So now we have 3 issues under epic 1. And if I were to drag this and mark it as done, so say we've completed that work, and now we go back to the roadmap, you can see that epic 1 now has this progress bar highlighted, and it says that 1 of 3 issues is complete. And if I were to move one of the other ones into the in progress column, that means it's in progress, and you can see that the rules are still working. And go back to the roadmap, so now we can see there's a blue highlight indicating that there's 1 issue in progress. So that's another bit of information that this roadmap can tell us. At the top here we can see the traditional filtering options, and then here you've got an option to just go to the current date. So let's say your plan is extending really out to the future, and then you just want to go back to present day. You can just click on that and it brings you back there. Here you've got some options. So if you don't want to see the dependencies, you can remove them. And then same thing with the progress bar. You can remove the progress bar if you don't want to see that. And then finally, you've got the timeline settings. So right now it's displaying the timeline in the form of months. So you can switch that to weeks if you want to kind of zoom in one level, or if you want to zoom out and you've got a lot of work that expands over multiple quarters, then you can view it in the form of quarters as well. And then above that, you can share the board and you can export it. Now this is interesting. You can actually share your timeline view based on however you've configured it and export that as an image, and then you can share that with relevant stakeholders. And that's pretty much it. I'm sure Atlassian is going to be adding more and more features to this roadmap functionality, but that's pretty much a summary and quick look at roadmaps for next-gen projects. So the next step now would be to get into the project settings so we can see what other functionality we can enable. Okay, so let's head over to our project settings. So here we've got our basic project details. You can update the icon, the name, the key of the project. You can also set a category. Now, this isn't something we've seen yet, but Jira does have a mechanism for you to categorize your projects. And by clicking on this, it will just take me to the administrative part of projects. So it's probably something that we will look at later. So I'll leave it for now. And just a note that you can delete your project by coming up here and selecting the option. All right, so that is straightforward. Let's move on to the access restrictions. So right now, there really isn't any restriction because the project access is set to being open. And we had kind of briefly seen this when we were creating the project. in that you've got three options. So by setting it to open means anyone with access to your cloud instance can access the project, and they can even create and edit issues. If you set it to limited, anyone with access to the instance would only be able to view issues. They are not able to create or edit anything. And then private, of course, prevents anyone from viewing issues, editing issues, pretty much anything. That would be the private setting. So this is the overall project access level. Now you do have the ability to add people. So just coming back to here, if you did set it to private or limited, you could individually add people and give them permissions to edit issues, because by default they wouldn't be able to. So you can add people by coming up here, and you can see right now there's only one user added, and that is because this is the administrator and this user is the one that created the project. So by default, that user is given the administrator role, which kind of brings me to roles. This is basically a project role, and that is how the permissions are assigned. You would create all these different roles, and then each role has a certain set of permissions, and then you can assign the role to various people. So you can see the roles that are available by coming up here and clicking on Manage Roles. So right now, by default, we've got three roles. Viewers, or anyone with the viewer role, can search through issues and can view the issues in your project. The member role, so a member is basically a part of the team. They can create issues, edit them, comment on them, move them between statuses, and just general collaborate on the project work. And then administrators, of course, can do pretty much everything. They can update the settings, they can go to the administration part of the project, manage features, customize issue types, and all that admin stuff. And notice here that you can actually create a custom role yourself. So before let's take a look at that. If I click on Create Role, you can give it a name, and here you see a list of all the permissions that are available, and it is very, very granular. So I'm not going to go through all of them in detail. I have provided a link where you can go through each one and understand what each one entails, but maybe we can skim through it at a high level. So you've got the administration part of it, and each role each permission kind of has a description which you can go through. So the administration part is, self-explanatory. Then you can manage the project. So things like adding and removing watchers, deleting stuff, whether it's an issue or comment, editing comments and work log entries and things like that. You can manage sprints, so that is a permission on its own, access to development tools, and then general working on issues, which is broken down into being able to assign, edit, link, things like that. Then there's a create issue permission, which is on its own by default, and then collaborating would include things like commenting, editing comments, so on and so forth. So you can create a role, and then you can handpick each permission that you would like that role to be able to have. So the reason I wanted to show you this is now we can take a look at the viewer role and see what the viewer role has. And you can see it's pretty much all unchecked. If I scroll down here, you can see that viewers can only collaborate, so they can add comments, attachments, they can edit their own comments, but that's pretty much it. The member role will probably have more permissions, so you can see that they can edit due dates, they can manage sprints, they can work on issues like editing issues, and pretty much everything that a viewer can do as well. And then finally, you would expect that the administrator would have pretty much everything. And there you go. So everything is selected. Now also notice that when I was clicking on this icon here basically is a duplicate. So if it's a duplicate function. So if you want to create a role, you can just copy one of the existing ones and then modify it from there. So for the sake of doing a quick demo, let's create a project role. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the member role. So I'll click on this, and let's maybe call this the developer project role. And then you can obviously update the description. So developers are part of the team. They can add, edit, collaborate on work, but I want them, but not able to manage sprints. So that is something that, I would expect only the project manager to be able to do. So I can come in here and leave everything the same, but I can uncheck being able to manage sprints and then hit create. And so now we've got our new project role. I can close this. Now, if I decide that I don't want this project to be open anymore, I want it to be private or perhaps maybe limited. So if I make it limited so people can still view issues, and then let me save that, now I can start coming in and adding people. So let me look for the developer user, and I can assign that user the developer role. So they would be able to come in now, and everyone in the instance can view the issues in this project, but only this user, because I assigned this role, would be able to edit issues, but they wouldn't be able to manage sprints. So now I can come in and I can add my project manager and assign the member role, because we saw that the member role can manage sprints. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I just wanted to do a quick demo just from a surface level standpoint. In fact, I can show you what it looks like from the developer user's standpoint. So I have the developer account in another window, and so let me just refresh this all projects page. So you can see that the My Next Gen project is visible here. So if I switch back to the admin account, and if I remove this user from that project role, and you can see that the project access is limited, we should expect that the developer user should continue to see it, and that is the case. But now if I were to come in and set it to private, now we should expect that that project should no longer appear for the developer. And there we go, so it's gone. So just to summarize this project access, when you set it to open, it basically means that everyone by default has the member role. Limited would imply that everyone by default has the viewer role, whereas private, only Jira admins and people you add to the project would have any kind of involvement. The last thing I want you to be aware of is that if you set this project to private, Jira administrators will not be able to see the issues that you create in there. However, Jira administrators can always access the project settings for this project, and they can always make it open again or limited. They can always change the project access because they can access the project settings. So just keep that in mind. Although they won't be able to view the issues, they can always access the settings and then change these access restrictions. Alright, so that's a look at the access restrictions. They really made it comprehensive to the point that you can really nitpick and create as many roles and assign specific permissions to each role. So the provisions are there for you to get very granular in how you want to set up your project access. Let's take a look at the next thing, which is issue types. And just before we move on, just want to point out that I switched the project access back to open just so that it doesn't interfere with the rest of the demo. Okay, so looking at issue types and also fields. Here you can configure and manage things like your issue types and fields all within this project itself without affecting the rest of Jira or needing to bother any Jira admins. So because we created this project using the Kanban template, it by default gives us the epic, task, and subtask issue types. But I can add more, so if I click on add issue type, Jira suggests either bug or story. These are already built into Jira, so you have the ability of just adding them into the project. So I can select bug, either one of them, and click add, so now you have bugs. Also, you can create your own. So if I click create issue type here, maybe we can create one called investigation for any investigative type work that's needed, and then you can put in an appropriate icon. So maybe I'll use the question mark and hit create. So now we've got an investigation issue type. So if I go back to the board, so now if I create an issue, so here you can see that first of all you can specify what issue type you want it to be, and then let's call this investigation 1, and it's that easy. Now given that I created it within the swim lane, it automatically got assigned to the developer. So coming back to the project settings, let me just open that up in its own tab. So we have the investigation issue type created. You can also create your own custom fields. So before we get into that, this is the layout of the fields. So when you click on an issue, the details that you see here is laid out and can be configured through here. So if we want to maybe look at the investigation issue type we just created, you can see here that some of the pre-configured fields that Jira has are listed over here, but they're not really being used and they're not being displayed. So you can just drag them into here and it highlights where you'd like to place it. So we can move it right below status in the context field section. Now regarding these sections, so we've got description fields, context fields, and then below that you can see the hidden fields. Just to show you what that is, if I open one of these issues in its own tab, so anything that you add in the description field section will appear in this main panel over here. Any of the context fields are displayed on the side, and if you have hidden fields, you will see that there will be an option to show more fields. So maybe this is not the best example. Let me go back here and let me look at tasks. Oh, forgot to save this. Let me save that. Go to task. Okay, so the task has a hidden field. Maybe we can add the due date and the start date as hidden fields. So now let me go back to the board and let me click on a task and let's view that in its own tab. So you've got your context fields and guess what? I forgot to save it again. So this is something that you should always be wary of. Remember to save, and then let's come back here, hit refresh. Alright, so there you go. Now you can see that there are two fields that are hidden, but they will not be hidden the moment you specify a value. So if I come in and select a value and click out of it and show less, now you can see that it appears and there's only one field that's hidden because it doesn't have a value. So that is a breakdown of how the fields are grouped on the issue details page. So like I was saying, if we come back to the investigation issue type, we added the priority in there. So once again, let me close this one. Let's go back to the investigation issue. So you can see the priority is showing up here. We can even create a field. So you'll notice that if I select short text, I can only add that either to the context field section or the hidden field section. But a paragraph, I can only drag into the description fields. So let's just do that. And maybe I can call this, so enter the field name. Let's call this investigation results. And then I'll leave everything else blank. Okay, so now if I come back to the screen, let me maybe refresh this. And there you go. So now you have the investigation results field appearing right below the description. And once again, if I open that up in its own tab, you'll see that appearing in the description fields section. So that's a quick look at issue types and fields. It's really easy to come in and add your own issue types, configure how you want the fields to be displayed, which fields you want displayed, and you can go in and select from this range of different field options to create your own custom fields. Okay, so let's move on and let's look at notifications as well. Now this functionality is also relatively new and was added to the next-gen projects only recently, but here you can see a list of events and the corresponding recipients. So whenever any of these events take place, you can have Jira send an email notification to the respective recipients. You can come in here and you can add a notification, but just keep in mind that the event list is fixed. So here the only event that you can pick is issue comment deleted, and you'll notice that over here if I come in and remove one of these, so let's say the work logged on issue, I don't really want that to trigger a notification. I can come in and delete it, and then if I want to add it back in again, you can come up to add notification, and now you can see the option here. So these two events plus the ones listed here are the only ones that you can really work with. But you can adjust the recipients accordingly. So you can see these as all the options. The watchers, the assignee, the current user, or even the reporter are based on the project role, which we had seen in the last video. And then lastly, you can also customize the email address that the email appears to come from. So there is some more customization ability that you can do specific to notifications in the NextGen project. Okay, so now we are approaching the last couple of parts of our NextGen project settings. So let's cover that in the next video. All right, we're at the home stretch. Let's take a look at the features. Now, these are all the features that you can enable and disable in a NextGen project depending on what you want. So coming back here, I have the actual project open in its own tab, and you can see this is all the features that we can see right now. So let me come in here. The roadmap is already enabled. If I went in and disabled it, and I came in and did a refresh, you'll see that option gone. So that really depends on whether you want to use the roadmap functionality. If you're not going to, there's no point showing it, so you can go in and you can disable it. You have a backlog option. So if I enable that, let's take a look. If I refresh my project, you can now see that there's a backlog option. And when I go to it, you will see that Jira automatically prompts me right away saying, hey, would you like to fill your backlog with the items in the first column? And I think that makes sense. That would be the main point of a backlog, to make sure that your board doesn't get unmanageable where the first column just keeps growing and growing and growing. So yes, let's move it to the backlog. So now I can manage all the pending work here, and then only when things are ready for development, I can move them into the board. And just like we saw in Kanban, you can come to the board, and now all that stuff will appear here in the first column. Another thing I want to point out is now that we have a backlog view, you can come up here to this Epic dropdown that you see, and you can enable the Epic panel because the roadmap feature is gone. So how would you manage your epics? So you can come in and enable that, and just like we've seen in classic projects, now you have that Epic panel, and you can see your epics listed here, and you can drag and drop issues into the epic just like we have seen before. Okay, so that's a backlog. Guess what? In addition to the backlog, you can also enable sprints. So right now we had created this project as a Kanban project, but I can come into the settings and immediately convert that into a sprint or Scrum based project. So now if I go back, and if I go to the board, you will see that it's completely empty. That's because based on the way Scrum works, this board will only get populated when there's an ongoing sprint. So now if I go to the backlog view, you can see that a sprint is automatically created, and I have the ability to create more. And now all my issues in the backlog, I can start moving them into the sprint and then running sprints just like I would in a Scrum-based project. Now I'm not going to go through all of that right now because we have seen that already, but I just wanted to show you that it's that easy to just enable that functionality. You can also have reports available. So if I come in now and if I refresh, you will see a report section. And so if I go in there, right now there are only 4 reports available. And you can see here that these 3 reports are dependent on sprints. So it's awaiting for a sprint to take place and to be completed. So again, I'm not going to go into details here, but you do have some reporting ability in NextGen projects, and I'm sure there's going to be more to come later. Okay, what else do we have? Right now, there are no estimations. So coming back to the backlog view, when I click on an issue, right now I don't see any story point fields, but I can come in here and I can enable that. And right now you can only do estimations in story points. So when I come back here and let me do a quick refresh, and so now when I select the field and I scroll down, you can see that there are story point estimate fields, and I can come in here and I can specify the story points, and then it's not automatically showing up, but if I do a refresh, there you go, you can see the story point estimate right there. And if I were to drag that into the sprint, you can see that it tells me there are 5 story points in progress. Now it's probably in progress because that is what the status of that issue was. So I haven't started that sprint yet, but let me maybe view the details of it. Yep, there you go. So that issue is in progress. That's why it's showing the story points in the in progress category. Okay, So moving on, Pages is already enabled. That is really effective if you have Confluence. So you can connect Confluence pages to your project as well. Now, we also have the releases and versioning functionality, which you can enable. So just like we had done in Scrum projects, now if I refresh this, I can go into my releases section and I can start creating my versions. So I can call this version 1 and hit save. And then now if I go to the backlog, you can see a versions drop down and I can come in and enable the versions panel. And similarly, I can drag and drop issues into there. Now, just one thing to note is that you can't have both Epic and version panels enabled. So right now the versions panel is enabled. If I were to come in and enable the Epics panel, the versions panel would go away. So you can only really see one of them at a time, at least as of right now. Okay, and the last thing is the issue navigator. So let me enable this as well and come back here, do a refresh, and you will see that now you have an issues section. So I can click on that, and this project now has its very own issue navigator where I can search for issues, I can filter by some of the filters that come with it. And of course, if I want to do a more advanced search, I can come and click here, which will just take me out of the project and take me to the Jira issue navigator. Pretty cool, huh? I think it's really flexible and nifty the way that you can come in and enable all these features depending on how you want to run your project. Now the last thing here is apps. So if your instance has other third-party apps, then if they do have any integration with next-gen projects, they might appear here. Right now, you can just see Project Automation, which was acquired by Atlassian recently. So that's pretty much it. We just took a look at all the features and capabilities of a next-gen project. It is pretty advantageous in some ways in that it is so fast and easy to set them up and configure them. In fact, if you came to this project right now from a third-party standpoint, from a neutral standpoint, you could probably barely tell the difference between this and a classic project because it pretty much has everything. It's just this little tip at the bottom here tells you that you're in a next-gen project. I guess one thing that is still missing is components, so maybe we'll see that in the future as well. Before we end this section, I just want to leave you guys with one link. I have provided this link in the resources section, and this is where you can go to keep a track of what's going on with the next-gen project development. So right now, if I scroll down, you can see that these are all the features and functionality that has been shipped recently. So we can see the issue navigator is brand new. Over here, if I expand this, this is basically saying that the swim lanes are configurable on a per member basis. So each team member can set up their swim lanes without affecting anyone else viewing the board. Here, it looks like they also just launched the next-gen permissions, the comprehensive permissions that we went through. And then if I scroll down further, you can see what's in development. So it looks like they are going to provide a completely new workflow editor, which looks pretty cool. So that's probably up and coming in 2020 at some point. You'll probably have some more functionality to clean up your boards. There's going to be the ability to copy project configurations and workflows. A lot of things that are coming down the pipe. Some more report types, being able to estimate in hours, lots of stuff. So stay tuned. It's going to be very interesting and exciting to see these features eventually come into effect. Earlier, I had mentioned that there is no workflow configuration in next-gen projects, but had identified it as one of the things Atlassian had in development. Well, we now finally have it, a workflow editor for next-gen projects. And you'll notice that the managing rules aspect has also been moved to the workflow editor. So previously, we were able to manage the rules by coming up here to the ellipsis, but now we see that we have a manage workflow option. We can also access that if we go to the project settings, which I'll pop open in a new tab. And if we go to issue types, you'll see here that the edit workflow option is available here as well, and you can select any issue type and edit the workflow. Now, for now, Atlassian has, or I guess they haven't yet given or released the option to edit the workflow for each issue type, where each one will have a different workflow. Right now, if you edit the workflow here, you will end up editing it for all the issue types. So I could really select any one and click edit workflow, and that will take me to the workflow editor, which we have kind of seen in the admin section of the course, but this looks like a slightly different kind of editor in terms of look and feel, but the overall functionality is essentially the same. So we can add new statuses by coming up here, and you can add it either in the to-do status category or the in-progress status category, and they'll get highlighted here in the respective color. Now keep in mind that at least right now for next-gen projects, it only allows us to add one single done status in the workflow. So because we already have done, it's not letting us add another done status. Similarly, you can also add transitions by clicking this button, and it'll give you a pop-up selecting what status to what status. But you can also come in and drag and drop transitions like so between statuses. But I'll just cancel out of this for now. This workflow we see here allows any status to transition to any other status, but you can always click this and delete the transition and delete all of these and then implement the workflow and specific transitions that you want depending on your requirements. So for instance, if I were to take the review status that we had added, just like we added the column on the board, so now we can also delete this review status from here. Let me click on delete status. And so that goes away. Let's save this. And you can see here that it's going to apply to all the 5 issue types in the project. However, Atlassian is promising the ability to customize the workflow for each issue type in the near future. So let's copy this over. And so now it tells us all the issues for the respective issue types that are in the review status. Because we're deleting it, it's going to move them into another status. In this case, all of them will go to in progress. So I'll keep that the same, and let's hit save. And now if I go back to the board, you'll see that the review status disappeared. So now the board and that workflow editor are linked. So if I were to come in and add another column here, similarly when I go to the workflow, we will see that status getting added in the workflow editor. So now let's take a look at rules. So if I go back to the workflow editor, you can see here that it's got a icon here and it's actually giving me a warning. So let's click on this, and you can see that this is one of the rules that we had configured before. So if I select this, let's see what it's telling us. So we can see here that this rule was automatically assigning an issue to the KS developer, but it looks like it cannot find that user at the moment. So let me cancel out of this for now, and I will discard the changes. Let me just head back into the access settings. All right, so it looks like at some point I had changed the project access back to private. So let me go ahead and make that open to everyone. Let me save that, and hopefully that should fix the issue that we saw with the workflow. So I'll head back into edit workflow, and yep, so there you go, no more warnings. But you can see that all our automations or rules that we had configured before are now showing up here in the workflow editor, and they're kind of represented with that automation icon. And if you want to add more rules, you can either click on this plus sign here, or you can just come up here to the top and click on rule. And so now it looks like Atlassian has introduced a few more rules that we can utilize. So the first one is restrict who can move an issue. So if we select that, so for this particular transition, because I had it selected, you can specify that only certain people can move the issue or can transition that issue, or you can even specify it based on roles. So let me cancel out of this for now. And if I were to just, unselect, so no transitions are selected, and I click on rule, you would have to select the transition. So maybe let's take a look at these other two. So this one, is you can check that an issue has been through a particular status. So that's kind of interesting. And then the other one is you can check an issues field. Let's take a look and see what fields are available. So first I gotta pick the transition. So let's use that as an example. And it looks like these are the only fields that Jira is giving us for now for next-gen projects that we can check the field, or I guess the value, before we can, allow that transition. So I think a good demo is, let's come back to rules. Actually, before this, I'm going to add the review status back in. So let's click on in progress status, and the review option is available. So we can select that, add that back in. We can just move these things around. So before we do anything, let's just make sure it comes back. So I'm going to save this, and let's go back to the board, and maybe we can do a quick refresh. Okay, so it automatically puts it at the end, but we can just drag that into here just like we had before. Okay, so let's go back to editing the workflow. All right, so now the rule that I'm going to implement is, let me do this for the done transition. I'll click on rule, and let's choose this one. So check that an issue has been through a status. So I'll select that. And so now we have the transition that we want. And what I'll do is I will just add a rule, just for example purposes, that the issue had to have gone through the review status before we can mark it as done. So it's kind of a way to enforce that tickets are reviewed before they're completed. And you've got some other options here to include the issue's current status as part of that check. You can reverse the rule, so only allow the transition if the issue hasn't been through the selected statuses. And then a couple more options. Only consider the issue's most recent status. So, if the issue, I guess that's kind of self-explanatory. Only check the status set just prior to the issue's current status. Or you can just ignore status updates from loop transitions. So it's kind of self-explanatory, and I'll let you guys go in and test these out yourself. That's what I'd recommend. For now, I'll just leave these unchecked, and let me click add. Now let's save this once again for all the different issue types. And if we go back to the board, what I want to do is I just want to go back to the normal original board by disabling some of these features here. And let me go back here and do a quick refresh. Oh, I think it did refresh. Okay, good. So now I'm back to a normal Kanban board, and I have the issues. So if I were to take this particular issue, you can see that it's not letting me move to the done status because it says a workflow rule prevents you from moving the issue. So I would need to first move it into the review status. And now from here, now this is interesting. You can see that it's still not letting me move it to the done status. So let's head back and let's see what's causing that. If I go back to the workflow editor and I click on this transition, let's take a look. So this setting is what we would have needed to enable to include the issue's current status, because the current status is review, and that's what we're checking against. So I'll enable that, click update, and let's remember to save this. And let's go back to the board. And so now you can see that it's letting me do the done transition. So there you go. That's a quick high-level look at the new workflow editor in next-gen projects, as well as the new rules that have been moved over to the editor and enabled for us to use going forward. Like I said, I'm sure Atlassian is going to continue evolving this functionality and adding more and more features as time goes on. And feel free to refer to the link I mentioned in the previous video to track that backlog and development effort. For now, we can move on to the next section.